Welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping right into one of the most fascinating and, frankly, kind of terrifying scenarios in human psychology. Every single night, all over the world, people zip themselves up inside paper-thin tents in the middle of forests, filled with animals that could literally end their lives in seconds. You know the setup. Bears are wandering the woods, wolves are crossing the trails, mountain lions are moving through the exact same darkness in almost perfect silence. And yet, miraculously, almost every single camper wakes up the next morning completely unharmed. Today, we're unpacking the absolute wild science behind why we almost always survive the night when we're totally surrounded by deadly predators. Okay, let's dive into this paradox by putting ourselves directly in the predator's shoes. I mean, think about it from a wild animal's perspective. A human camper looks like the absolute easiest, most defenseless prey imaginable. You're asleep, you're lying completely flat on the ground, you're totally blind in the dark, and you're literally wrapped up like a warm, breathing burrito. You have zero idea what's moving around outside your tent. So why doesn't anything happen? Why don't they just take the free meal? Section 1, Predators Watch You in the Dark. Let's shift our perspective to the woods at night, because the first thing we really need to clear up is a massive misconception. The answer is absolutely not that these animals simply don't notice you.
Here is the genuinely unsettling reality of the wilderness. Predators know exactly where you are, long before you'd ever see them. A bear can smell your food, your sweat, the smoke from your fire, even the literal plastic of your tent from an incredible distance away. A wolf can hear your tiny, subtle movements in the dark. A mountain lion could literally be watching your campsite right now without making a single sound. If a large predator is near your tent, it knows you are there for sure. But, and here's the twist, knowing you're there absolutely does not mean it sees you as food. So the absolutely crucial point here is that wild predators are not these reckless, bloodthirsty monsters. Actually, scratch that. They are incredibly calculated survivors. In nature, one single wrong move is entirely fatal. A wolf that attacks something dangerous might end up with a broken leg, which means it can't hunt, which means it starves. A mountain lion that wastes energy on the wrong target might lose its real meal. The animals alive today are the descendants of creatures that actively, constantly avoided stupid risks. Which brings us to Section 2, neophobia, or the fear of the unknown. Let's look at how animals actually perceive you and your bizarre little campsite. What's super interesting is how animal behaviorists use this term, neophobia. In the wild, the unknown is dangerous, period. To a cautious predator, a brand new smell, a strange geometric shape, or a weird sound in the dark is not an invitation for dinner. It's a terrifying potential danger. It could be a trap, it could be a stronger competitor. So the absolute safest choice for a wild animal is almost always to just keep its distance. This really highlights the extreme contrast between what a predator expects and what a camper actually is. Predators spend their entire lives learning the highly predictable patterns of normal prey, right? A deer runs away, a rabbit jumps, a mouse scurries to a hole. But a human camper, we're incredibly confusing. We lie perfectly still for hours. We don't act like an animal grazing in the woods. Plus, the smells around us are pure chaos to a wild animal's nose. We smell like chemical detergents, plastic, sunscreen, cooked food. None of these things belong in the forest. To a predator, these aren't signals of a meal. They're giant red flags. And that brings us to my absolute favorite quote from our source material today. Referring to your camping tent, it says, "It doesn't protect you like a wall, it protects you like a question mark." That thin nylon fabric wouldn't stop a bear's claws for a single second, but it works because it completely scrambles a predator's brain. It's this weird, glowing, chemically scented shape in the dark that makes zero sense. That profound confusion is our primary shield. Let's move to Section 3, the bloody history between us. We need to look at the evolutionary timeline to see how this builds into a much deeper, historical reason why animals avoid us. Walk with me through this timeline, because this fear isn't just about weird smells, it's practically written into their DNA. A very long time ago, humans actually were vulnerable prey hiding in the dark. We were smaller, we were weaker, but then everything changed. We mastered fire. We learned to hunt in highly coordinated packs. We developed lethal weapons with sharp edges. Over thousands of generations, we completely flipped the script and became the absolute apex danger in almost every ecosystem we ever entered. Over those thousands of generations, predators learned a hard, unforgiving rule: stay away from humans. The predator families that ignored this rule, well, they simply didn't survive to pass on their genes.
A sleeping deer is just a deer, but a sleeping human, that is a terrifying wild card. We might have a fire nearby, we might have a whole pack waiting in the dark, or we might wake up holding something incredibly sharp. For an animal built purely for survival, a human is simply a terrible, terrible gamble.
Of course, we do have to look at Section 4, the exceptions. When do attacks actually happen? Because while that barrier of neophobia is incredibly strong, it does occasionally break down, and that's when tragedies occur. The data points to 3 very specific triggers that cause a predator to overcome its natural evolutionary fear of humans and actually attack a camp. Let's break each one down.
The first, and honestly the most common reason, is food and habituation. When a bear, for instance, learns to associate human tents with highly caloric snacks, garbage, or coolers, its mental equation completely changes. It stops seeing the campsite as this scary, confusing mystery and starts seeing it as an easy buffet. The bear doesn't suddenly turn evil, it just becomes trained. That natural fear is entirely replaced by the promise of a massive, tasty reward. The second trigger is pure desperation. A starving, severely injured, or elderly predator that can no longer hunt its natural prey will take desperate risks that a healthy animal wouldn't even consider. A classic historical example is the infamous 1898 Tsavo lions in Kenya. Studies of those lions later showed they had severe dental problems and jaw injuries, making normal hunting nearly impossible. When pain and hunger get extreme enough, they totally override that instinctual fear.
The third trigger is an immediate defensive threat. If you surprise an animal in the pitch black, or accidentally walk between a mother and her cubs, or corner a predator, the resulting attack isn't a hunt for food. It is a violent, immediate defense mechanism. In that split second, the animal isn't thinking dinner, it's thinking danger. Notice what is not on this list. A perfectly healthy predator quietly deciding that a human in a tent is the easiest dinner option. That is incredibly, unbelievably rare. As we wrap up this explainer, let's head into Section 5, the forest's message to you. Let's shift back to that psychological battle of lying awake in the woods, listening to twigs snap in the darkness. You see, social predators like wolves don't just read bodies, they read behavior. They know exactly what panic looks like. They know the structure of a vulnerable herd. But a human camp lacks all of those recognizable signals. There's no clear leader to target, no familiar flight response. Just weird shapes and completely unnatural silences. A predator circling in the dark isn't usually trying to figure out how to attack you. It's furiously trying to understand what it is even looking at. That sheer, overwhelming confusion is exactly what keeps you safe. Which leads us to this final, pretty provocative thought. Every year, millions of people camp safely in predator territory. They survive the night not because they're invisible, but because the predator standing just outside their tent is asking itself this exact question. Is it worth the risk? And thanks to our confusing tents, our weird smells, and a deep evolutionary lesson written by generations of fire and weapons, the animal's answer is almost always no. So respect the wild, keep your food locked up, and sleep peacefully. Thanks so much for joining me for today's explainer. I'll catch you in the next one.